It is a quiet, chilling spectacle happening right now along the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic shores of Florida. It's not a hurricane, not a housing crash, and not a global pandemic. It is a mass exodus of the state's most loyal, most lucrative customer base, and it was entirely self-inflicted. Imagine the sound of 6.6 billion not just leaving a state, but slamming the door shut on the way out. This is the reality behind a phone call that shook the foundations of Florida's winter economy on February 15, 2025. A tourism executive's voice, reportedly shaking, delivered the verdict. We just lost the Canadians. 6 months of political grandstanding had achieved what natural disasters and recessions never could complete: coordinated economic rejection by Florida's most valuable seasonal residents. On Oddworld Files, we dissect the descent to find common sense, and this is one of the most baffling. How did the Sunshine State, the land of eternal winter welcome, drive away the Canadian snowbirds, the little golden geese of its economy? We're not talking about a temporary dip. We're talking about a strategic implosion engineered by the very politicians sworn to protect the state's prosperity. We will reveal the chilling data, the shocking miscalculations, and the desperate scramble of international competitors who are capitalizing mercilessly on Florida's political suicide. To truly grasp the horror of a catastrophe, we first must appreciate the unique genius of the Canadian snowbird model. For decades, Florida's winter economy operated on a simple, ironclad principle: reliable. A Canadian snowbird wasn't a week-long tourist rarest, dropping fuzz and $200 in a hotel and a few theme park tickets. They were a seasonal resident. They arrived in November and often stayed through March. 5-month infusion of cash that sustained entire communities through what would otherwise be the shoulder season. They bought homes, paid property taxes year-round, and hired local services. We are talking about an average household spend of $33,000 per stay. These residents integrated, using local dentists, scheduling medical procedures, hiring contractors for renovations, and filling up local restaurants and retail shops for half the year. This was an unbreakable, symbiotic relationship. The Canadian dollar flowed into Florida coffers, ensuring the municipal services, infrastructure, and local businesses thrived. They epitomized the concept of value tourism. The Florida political class, having enjoyed this effortless revenue stream for so long, made a fatal, arrogant assumption that the Canadians needed Florida's weather more than Florida needed their money. They believed the relationship was unbreakable. The exodus began quietly, not with a bang, but with a series of digital cancellations. In January 2025, the first trimmers hit. Rental bookings were down 31%. Property searches plummeted 45%. Airline reservations, the clearest indicator of intent, dropped 38%. Any rational government, relying on the best economic sauce from the state's own tourism board, would have hit the brakes. The data was a flashing red siren, but the politicians chose to double down. They traded decades of economic certainty for a few months of political applause. They chose escalation over a clause in policies and hostile rhetoric that specifically targeted foreign ownership and seasonal residents. In a move that shocked the Canadian Snowbird Association, CSIS, a powerful organization representing over 1 million seasonal travelers, the U.S. clamped down on Canadians visiting for more than 30 days, requiring new bureaucratic hurdles like back-end checks and fingerprints. For a demographic that values convenience and feels a historic closeness to the U.S., this felt less like a border policy and more like a political slap in the face. This is the dangerous aspect when political symbolism is prioritized over economic survival. The political class celebrated a victory for America first, while the accountants were quietly calculating the disaster. The miscalculation wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate, ideological choice that destroyed the meticulously built trust overnight, leading directly to that fateful phone call in mid-February, confirming the irreversible loss of $6.6 billion annual spending. Horror aspects of this economic implosion are found in the raw numbers, and they extend far beyond just hotels and restaurants. This is a story of entire sectors being fundamentally destabilized. Let's look at the logical, and $6.6 billion was only the start. Property tax revenue from foreign seasonal residents, the very foundation of local municipal budgets, dropped by $2.1 billion. Local governments watched their tax bases evaporate overnight, while their fixed costs, emergency services, road maintenance, and municipal bonds remained constant. The structure of entire towns, particularly those in the Southwest and Gulf coasts, suddenly became financially untenable. But here's where the story gets truly interesting and potentially dangerous: the collapse of the medical and construction industries. Snowbirds weren't just vacationing, they were scheduling surgeries, specialist consultations, and major dental work during their long winter stays. Medical centers that rely on these seasonal patient patterns suddenly faced up to a 60% revenue drop. Simultaneously, the construction industry built around seasonal property maintenance collapsed. Canadian owners religiously upgraded and renovated. Contractors specializing in snowbird properties reported 70% revenue losses as their maintenance contracts vanished alongside the customers who funded them. When the lifeblood of a community, the taxes, the hospital revenue, and the construction jobs, dries up this complete, you don't just get a recession, you get ghost towns. Now, you might think, well, the US will just replace its Canadians with American tourists. This is the core of the political delusion, and you need to be horrified by the numbers we're about to share. Because the replacement math does not work. The replacement economics reveal the strategic stupidity of the state leadership. Remember the numbers: one Canadian seasonal household spent $33,000 over 6 months. Compare that to the average domestic tourist who spends about $1,200 on a week-long vacation. Simple division shows that to replace the revenue of one Canadian household, Florida would need to attract 28 American families annually. That volume simply does not exist at the scale required. Furthermore, American seasonal residents are not a viable substitute. Domestic second homeowners use their properties differently. They spend less on local services, and they do not integrate into the local economy with the same regularity as the long-stay Canadians. The economic models don't translate, the revenue streams don't replace, and the math guarantees a permanent structural loss. This wasn't a temporary loss of visitors. It was the loss of the economic anchor that stabilized entire communities. Meanwhile, the real estate market in heavily seasonal communities is cratering. Real estate brokers report an inventory surge as Canadian owners, fed up with the political Haussians, liquidate their holdings. Condos purchased specifically for snowbird rentals, once gold mines, are now worthless investments. Property values in these affected areas have plummeted by 30% as sellers flood the market and buyers vanish. This creates a terrifying feedback loop. Falling property values erode the tax base further, accelerating the municipal collapse. The most fascinating part of this story is the global context. While Florida's politicians were busy destroying their own market, international competitors were capitalizing mercilessly. This is the best source of information that proves the political decision was uniquely catastrophic. Portuguese tourism authorities, recognizing the value of the displaced Canadian snowbird, launched sophisticated campaigns targeting Canadian retirees. Mediterranean coastal cities offered similar climates, superior cultural attractions, and, crucially, actively welcomed seasonal residents. Portugal, with its favorable non-habitual resident tax regime, and Spain, with its easy long-stay visas, became the new, politically stable alternatives. Even closer, Mexico streamlined processes specifically for Canadian retirees, emphasizing their political stability and economic welcome. They learned the clear lesson from Florida's failure. Hey, respect for your customers is a prerequisite for prosperity. Competitors offered infrastructure that the snowbirds require: English-speaking services, international banking ease, and high-quality medical care, all without the backdrop of political hostility and annexation threats that pushed many Canadians away. Florida weaponized its own economy, and the rest of the world caught the wealthy customers right as they flew past. In this file is the lack of course correction. Why did state officials continue to defend policies that destroyed billions in economic activity? The answer lies in the corrosive incentive structure of modern politics. Admitting mistakes validates opposition criticism and energizes political challengers. For the leadership, short-term political survival required maintaining the position that guaranteed long-term economic destruction. They chose symbolic victories over common business sense. Leaked internal documents, mentioned by press sources, reveal the true scope of the panic behind the public denials. Tourism board communications showed desperate industry pleas for policy reversals. Private meetings featured stark warnings of economic consequences, yet the public statements continue to attribute the disruption to global market forces. Anything but acknowledging the connection between hostile rhetoric and customer exodus. This disconnect between private reality and public position guaranteed continued dysfunction. The transformation is not cyclical, it's permanent. Rebuilding trust requires sustained political stability that the current environment simply cannot provide. The seasonal residents who have established new homes in Portugal, Spain, or Mexico will not return simply because rhetoric moderates. Economic relationships severed through deliberate hostility require years of consistent, welcoming behavior to rebuild. Florida chose ideology over prosperity and achieved neither, leaving behind a profound and chilling lesson for every state dependent on international visitors. Relationships built over decades can be destroyed in mere months when political theater replaces business sense. The tragedy of the Florida snowbird exodus is not just a tale of lost money. It is a profound lesson in logical consequence. The mystery isn't what destroyed the tourism economy. It was the decision to treat an entire customer base as a political enemy. They found that money, much like water, always flows to the path of least resistance and greatest welcome. Florida's political gambit failed spectacularly. This is exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes mystery we break down using facts here at Oddworld Files. If you want to understand the strange, fascinating, and often dangerous forces shaping our world, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new here. And tell us in the comments, where do you think all the Canadian snowbirds will choose to go next?